Welcome to my first edition of Thrash It, Don't Trash It. Today we're going to take my old spa cover foam. We're going to make a surfboard out of it. I start by taking a piece of foam and cutting it down into two halves. I have a leftover piece of 1x6 select pine in the garage that I'm going to take out. We're going to use this as the stringer. I'm going to measure out pretty close to my final length. I have my 3 pieces here, which will build our blank. Here I'm cutting out the stringer. I've based the tail and nose rocker off a Channel Islands Rocket Wide, which I ride pretty daily and love. So here I need a little more foam for the nose rocker, so I'm taking some extra foam, using some Gorilla Glue, ratcheting this together. After it's dried, I'm sanding down the insides. I'm going to cut down the stringer so we don't have so much weight in the stringer. I'm going to sand it down to pretty close to the final dimensions again. I want a little on there so I have some room to shape. Here I'm taking all 3 pieces and I'm going to coat them in, again, an expandable Gorilla Glue. This is great for filling all the little EPS holes. I probably use too much, but more is better than less. So now we're going to take a couple 2x4s, a couple ratchet straps, strap all this thing together, make sure it's nice and tight, everything's even. Let her sit. There goes that glue, expanding away. Now we're going to unratchet everything and we will be left with our blank that we will be shaping up here. Glue really came up, expanded there, covered everything. I know we got a good tight bond. Here I'm going to take my plane and I'm really just knocking down all the excess foam. We have our base shape and our stringer, so I'm just trying to get everything kind of straightened out. We leave a little extra for final shaping, but again, just getting a base before we do our outline. When I do measure this outline, I am basing my shape off a Channel Islands Average Joe. Fatten up the tail a bit, fatten up the nose a bit, give me a little extra foam, something I'd be liking to ride. So here we go, I've done my outline. We're gonna cut it out, just a basic handsaw, cut around everything, make sure I got pretty close to where I wanna be. I'm now gonna rasp down with a hand rasp until I have my final outline here. Looks pretty good, nice little fun shape, good to go. We're now gonna take the hand rasp, get a nice shape on it, clean everything up, start marking those rails. I decided to lay out a medium style rail for this board, nothing too high performance. Again, we're trying to keep a little more foam under me, easier paddle, fun to ride. I want to work down my edges with my hand rasp. I'm going to go ahead and get all the excess foam out of the way. Once I've done that, I'm going to switch over to an 80 grit block and I'm really going to sand these edges super nice, super fine, really clean lines, just how I want it. I originally planned for a single concave in this board, so I'm just knocking the rest of the stringer down, checking my shape, making sure I got the distance that I want for my concave, and I'm gonna final sand that. Now we're gonna take our rasp again, just like we did on the top, knock down the extra foam on the tuck, go back to the block, get those lines really nice and smooth, grab a piece of 220 and smooth out those rails. Now that I've got my final shape ready to go, I'm going to take some of this Fast 5 joint compound I had lying around. We're going to use this to fill all the imperfections in the EPS. I just smear it on with a pair of gloves and a putty knife. Next day, when everything's nice and dry, we're going to sand all that joint compound down. So we're right back down to the foam, final shape. Then we're going to lay out for our 5-fin future boxes. After I laid out my boxes, I made the mistake of routing out the entire portion of the size of the fin box instead of just making the depression on top and routing out the deep part of the box. This is my 5th board. I'm learning to make boards. Every other one I did was a glass on fin. I guess that's just part of my learning curve. There's going to be a little extra resin in there. Should create a little more weight in the back. Regardless, we're still going to thrash it. Now that I've got all my fins routed out, I'm going to check the depth of my boxes, make sure everything is just where I want it. Looks good. I'm gonna mix up some gray acrylic paint here. I liked the color of the gray. It's gonna go good with the tail patch that I will be adding later. So we're gonna go ahead and coat the bottle and board. I kept the stringer wood color, so we're gonna go ahead and peel our tape here and see a beautiful line. Again, we're filling these whole fin boxes with resin. Way it goes. Here's our tail patch. I had some leftover material of a floral print. Go ahead and lay that on. Looks good. Here I'm just printing out my logos on some rice paper. That's what I will use after cutting out to put my logos on my board. Now we're going to tape off our fin boxes. If resin would get in there, it'd be absolutely devastating and ruin this board. I glassed the bottom in a 6-ounce glass, and I'm going to end up doing the top in a 6-4. So here we're just mixing up some Rapid Set, laying our glass, good to go. Okay, so first layer is going to be our 6-ounce glass. I'm going to cut that right up to the board. After I lay all my 6-ounce glass here and get it cut, I'm going to come back with a layer of my 4-ounce on top. Now that I've laid all my 4-ounce out, I'm going to go ahead and cut everything out. Cut my slits for my tail and my nose, and now we're going to go ahead and put the logos on. This time I went in between the layers. I've always gone under both layers. I ended up sanding through just a little bit there, but it is what it is. So again, we're using some Rapid Set. We're just going to soak our edges, get everything tucked up. Make sure you chase all those drips nice and clean when you're done. Next day after it dries, I'm just taking some 120 grit sandpaper here, knocking down my lap, making sure everything's nice and smooth. We're gonna go ahead and tape those edges and get ready for our first fill coat. This fill coat I'm using, again, a Rapid Set resin, but I'm putting a additive F in to make everything surface a little better. There's our first coat. We're gonna go the next day again. We're gonna go ahead and sand down the top portion where we had any drips or any imperfections, get it all cleaned up, tape off our edges one more time, and we're gonna go ahead and pour our second fill coat on top of this. Just like before, I'm using a Rapid Set resin with an additive F to let it surface out really clean. Once we get everything brushed on, we're going to do a full sand down. I used a piece of 220 grit and just my orbital sander. That's all I have to do my sanding. Use what you got. Board sanded down nice and clean. We're gonna do the same on the edges. I usually try and get some hand paper 220 and 320, and I start working the edges right back to the top, sand the top down, make sure everything's really smooth before we do our final gloss coats. So before I did that, I decided to add a pin line here. Now this is my first time doing a resin-based pin line. I usually paint them and they never come out very crisp and clean. So this time I wanted to figure it out and finally learn. So I set a piece of 1/4-inch tape down just so I can get a nice straight guideline for my frog tape. I wanted everything not to seep. So we're going to go ahead, lay up the rest of our pin line here over our tail patch, and then we're gonna get our resin going. Just like the whole board, I'm going to go ahead and mix up a Rapid Set epoxy. This does not have any additive in it. It does have Cabasil though. I used Cabasil so I could change the viscosity to thicken it up so it didn't bleed under the tape. For my first line, it was a little thick, but it came out really well and I was very happy with it. Now that we have our pin line, we're going to go ahead and start our gloss coats. 1 to 2 mixture here, Rapid Set, additive F to surface, mix it up, and we're gonna lay a nice big gloss coat on here. I start with the edges. I'm very mindful of my resin. I don't waste a lot being it's pretty pricey. So we get our coat on, brush it back and forth, and it looks really, really nice at this point. That side's dry, we're gonna tip it over, do the exact same thing on the top. Nice big coat, get our edges, make sure it all looks good, and let it sit. Now that our gloss coat is all finished up, we're going to go ahead and sand both sides down all the way from 220, 320, 400. Then I'll switch over to wet sand to go from 600, 800, 1000, 1500 to 2000. After I've run all my grits of sandpaper, I'm going to come back with a cutting compound. I'm going to cut both sides of the board, and then I'm going to use a polishing compound and polish for that nice shine. Well, here she is, 6.0, 23, 2.5. This is a fun build. I can't wait to do the next one. We'll be back with Thrash It, Don't Trash It.